Hey, David Agranoff here. I'm going to talk a little bit about Punk Rock Ghost Story. Um, I'm gonna be doing some things on my YouTube channel over the next couple days, all related to Punk Rock Ghost Story. Just some little extra bonuses uh, for my readers. This is the last couple weeks where Punk Rock Ghost Story will be my latest release. So I don't know. I just wanted to put a little push into Punk Rock Ghost Story. It's always going to be one of my favorites. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some readings, and if I flub or if I mess up a thing, I'm just going to keep going. Just pressing record, just doing my thing, and then gonna do a little kind of behind the scenes talking about those chapters. So there'll be a point where I'll say you kind of give you a spoiler warning and say this is a good time to buy the book. I'm really proud of this book, and if you haven't read it, there's still a lot you can get out of these little videos, but there's definitely some aspects that I don't know. I hope you check it out. Anyways, the book starts with three quotes, and so I wanted to talk about that in this video. The first quote is from a hardcore band from Cleveland, Ohio named Face Value, and they were kind of big in the early '90s in the Midwest. Well, I mean, they weren't a really huge band, but they meant a lot to me. And the quote is, "Your '87 is our '82. It makes no difference what we've been through." And that's from the second song on their 7-inch. And basically what it's saying is, the different eras of punk rock and hardcore, it doesn't matter if you're new school or old school or where you came from, you should all be in it together. And that's kind of what that quote was. The last quote, I'm going to do the middle quote last because it's the longest, is just the Misfits, too much horror business driving late at night. And that should be self-explanatory since this book mostly takes place on tour. And just a great song, great Misfits song. And of course, Misfits are the crossroads between punk rock and horror, and just wanted to give respect to them. Okay, so the middle quote is from an interview with Greg Gaffin of Bad Religion, and I don't even know what interview this appeared in, but I read it in some magazine interview, and it so encapsulated the theme of this book that I immediately wrote it down in a notebook, and so I don't even know where he said this, but he said this, and he said, "Kids think of the old school as some magical era. They don't realize how frightening it was to live in a world where people were violently opposed to you. I was in one of the biggest cities in America, LA, where you'd think there'd be some tolerance, but people wanted to kill us for the way we looked. Today, that doesn't seem possible." Yeah, and that quote just really sums up a lot of the themes of the book. So the prologue. So now I'm just going to read for a little bit. And yeah, this is the prologue of the book, so it doesn't need any setup. Some things can't die, no matter how hard someone tries to kill them. In the dark, dank basement, the screams still echo decades later. If you sit on the unfinished dirt floor long enough, you can still hear the echoes of that rage. They weren't huge crowds that gathered there, but sweat and energy shared in that small space was like a nova bursting inside the concrete walls. Power chords drove the insanity, the group madness of youth. The scene had changed. The world had changed. It was a past too powerful to die, a moment in history that could not be forgotten. The Chevy van coughed and spit like a cat trying to cough out a hairball. After thousands of miles, in the short 2 years of the van's life, it had already been pushed beyond reasonable expectations. Frank was white-knuckling the steering wheel, trying to will the engine not to die. Smoke rose from the hood. His bandmates were walking, putting down magazines, and realizing the danger they were suddenly in. Dickie reached up and turned down the Zero Boys on the mixtape blasting from the stereo, so all the cursing and pleading could be heard. He had just been nervously playing with a safety pin he put through his nose after he lost his nose ring. Oscar rolled around in the loft that housed the bed over the equipment and looked out the window and squinted at the desert sun. His mohawk looked saggy and flattened by sleep. What happened to the freeway? Oscar asked as he slid down onto the seat next to Gary. There wasn't... Sorry, hold on. There wasn't anything to see but 2 lanes of sand-swept highway. I don't even know. I don't even know where we are, Gary asked, as he rolled up the comic book he had been reading. Dickie pushed eject, and the tape popped out. They could now hear the wheezing death of the engine. The van pulled off to the side of the road and snap, crackle, and popping the gravel. Things had been tense most of the tour, but since the Houston show, the tension had become open warfare. It should have been one of the best of the tour. They had been looking forward to playing with a local act DRI since they booked the show months ago. Oscar had put the last of his speedballs in his arm that afternoon. That made him grumpy and sickly. Only a handful of people showed up, and even though DRI offered them a cut of their take, it wasn't enough to pay for their gas. They emptied their pockets to get to the show in Austin and pulled into town just in time to find out that the show was canceled. The promoter was evicted from his house, and the basement was his venue. Oscar was insufferable when his stash dried up, and he began detoxing. They spent the night in Austin digging in dumpsters for stale muffins and cakes. They didn't go hungry, but if they didn't gas and dash a few times, they would have never left Texas. New Mexico, said Frank. He squeezed the steering wheel so tight the pleather ached. Mexico? Oh, shit, Oscar said in disbelief. Dickie turned in the seat and hit his Jonesing guitar player with a rolled-up copy of Maximum Rock and Roll. New Mexico, you dumbass! Dickie understood that it wasn't just the lack of heroin giving Oscar the shakes. This tour had gone from adventure to insanity, and they were all scared. It had been 3 weeks since they left Indianapolis. It was impossible for any of them to remember what life had been like before. Days and nights ran together, and time passed in all kinds of fucked up ways. The fuckers had only one 7-inch that they sold through Classified and Maximum Rock and Roll. This tour had no business working. After 2 years of trading letters with members of Black Flag, they offered Frank a show. It had to be a straight trade, a basement show in Indianapolis for Black Flag, and a spot opening for their heroes in L.A. Frank got a list of phone numbers from Flag's roadie and started making calls. Pretty soon they had shows in basements, backyards, and even a sewer drain. Dickie thought the repoed 1980 Chevy van from his uncle's repair shop. Dickie bought the repoed 1980 Chevy van from his uncle's repair shop. An ugly white van, but in amazing shape considering the price. Gary and Frank worked for 6 months at Dairy Queen to make their payments. The manager was pissed when they quit for tour. They built a loft that looked like a short bunk bed so they could sleep over their gear and plastered the back window in stickers. All their favorite bands were represented. The Clash, Dead Kennedys, Sato Nation, Black Flag. They tested it with a show in Louisville opening for Squirrel Bait. All the equipment fit, and it was perfect for tour. What could go wrong? Frank turned off the engine and jumped out, waving his once white, now brown circle jerk shirt around, trying to get rid of the smoke. The rest of the band sat in the van staring. A part of all of them felt better when Frank was out of the van. Dickie, Gary, and Oscar watched Frank in silence. They had all grown afraid of him since the tour began. The vocalist opened the hood, and for a moment they were out of his line of sight. Dickie looked back at his bandmates. I told you we should have gone home. We're going to die out here, Gary said. It's him or us, Oscar said softly. It's just overheated, Frank yelled. Need some water. They were tired, strung out, and hungry. Frank was the only member of the band to never suggest quitting, with their tails tucked, going back to Indianapolis. They had planned to spend the entire month of July in the summer of 1982 on their tour. The fuckers and their shows meant everything to Frank. No matter what happened, he seemed to love every second. He was born for this. 200% grade A punk rocker. Oscar was higher than a weather balloon during most of the tours, so he never noticed a thing. No one complained because it never affected his guitar playing. Dickie enjoyed the shows, but worried constantly about the van, that he was still paying off working as a mechanic after school for his uncle. Everyone chipped in, but the title was in his name. Gary had basically run away from home, stealing his older brother's bass guitar, and spent the first leg of the drive scraping off embarrassing Kiss stickers. Frank was the only one old enough to be done with high school, but he quit or got kicked out, depending upon who was telling the story. All three of them replayed the many warnings they got from everyone when they started the band with him. No one, from his older brother to lifelong friends, thought doing a band with Frank would be easy. But the reality was, he was good at it. His lyrics were sharp, his vocals angry and on point. "We'll make the Phoenix show," Frank promised. He grabbed a gallon jug of water out of the back. When he opened the back, the burning desert air hit them. They were already shirtless, uncomfortable, and sweating. "Hotter than Satan's asshole out here," Frank said, and disappeared in front of the hood. Gary shook his head in disbelief. He didn't know anything about cars. His brother and father once restored a '65 Mustang together, while he was up in his room learning the Ramones' Black Flag records on his brother's barely used bass guitar. His father hated punk rock and gave him the "why can't you be like your brother" stare and speech a lot. More than once, Dad threatened to send him to military school or shave his hair off. He had been afraid to go home to face the fam, but at this point, staying on the road with Frank was far more frightening. "What if it doesn't start?" Gary asked. They all knew the chances of four spiked and dyed punk rockers getting rides hitchhiking in New Mexico were less than zero. A sign just up ahead read, "Holbrook 60, Flagstaff 100. No one wanted to think about walking across the desert. "Even if it starts, we have to go home," said Oscar. Dickie nodded. Born Richard Abrams, he was Dickie by his whole family. The punk world knew him as under the name Infected Dick. Frank had thought that they needed funny names in the insert for the record. He was Frank Fucker on vocals, Harry Gary on bass, Oscar the Crotch on guitar. Oscar was pissed when he saw the record. Even if Dickie had the most reason to be upset about the name Frank gave him. Dickie was the second oldest member of the band. After Frank, he would still graduate in the class of '83, like Frank was supposed to. They met each other in the first grade, discovered punk rock together when Kiss started to sound old and boring, and had skated more miles of Indianapolis together than the band had traveled. If anyone could reach Frank, it was Dickie. He looked at Oscar, Gary and Oscar, and they were silently begging him. Dickie closed his eyes for a second. You don't know him. You don't know him like I do. Look, he won't fucking quit. He won't. He's fucking crazy." Oscar raised his voice slightly. "You don't say anything, I will." "Maybe we should just do the flag show," said Gary. Oscar and Dickie shared a look. They were both starting to wonder if Frank had invented the flag show to convince them to go on tour. The next summer wouldn't work. Gary and Dickie were supposed to be starting college that fall. Dickie at IU, an hour south, and Gary at Ball State, an hour northeast. The band's shelf life didn't look good. Oscar had already grown tired of Frank's act. Frank drained the water into the radiator when Dickie walked around in front of the van. Dickie looked down the road. It had that wavy heat for miles in the distance. His skin felt like it was baking under the sun. He had a hard time believing that the band would start any time soon. "Hey, Frank, can we talk?" Frank poured the last of the water into the radiator and threw the jug in the sand, causing a small lizard to scurry away. Frank leaned against the front of the van and pulled his cigarette pack out of his pocket. He opened it and sighed, seeing that he only had 3 left. He put it in his mouth and fumbled in his pocket for the lighter. Dickie lit the cigarette before he got a chance. You have any smokes left? Dickie shook his head. No money, dude. Frank blew out his first drag and offered one to Dickie. He lightly puffed before handing it back to Frank. We get the van started, Frank. We have to go home. Frank laughed. Quit? You want to quit? 2 fucking shows away from Flag in LA and you want to quit? We all do, Frank. This tour has been a fucking nightmare. Rednecks, jocks, cops. We haven't made a fucking dime, man. Oscar isn't the only one losing weight. Frank was a naturally big guy, recruited for the football team each year, but he never played. The team was filled with jocks that picked on him before his growth spurt. Classic rock listening macho assholes who stuffed his friends in lockers and were afraid of one punk and one punk only. He was the only one that didn't get called a faggot or a weirdo in the hallways. Other punks had to worry about rednecks jumping out of trucks and attacking them, but not Frank. That was all before 3 weeks of eating only what they could dumpster and steal. Now Frank had bags under his eyes and his frame was showing. He looked scary for a different reason. Now it was behind his eyes. A semi-truck came down the highway, going well past 55. Oscar and Gary got out to wave it down. It flew past so fast, Dickie almost fell over. The dust swirled around them, giving the moment a surreal, hellish feel. Gary and Oscar were cursing the now distant truck. We're finishing the tour. Oscar stepped forward. Don't give us a speech, man. I'm calling a fucking band meeting. Right here in the asshole of nowhere. We're not having a fucking meeting, Frank laughed. Oscar shook his head in disbelief. You're outnumbered. We all want to go home, sleep in real beds, and eat real food. You're all a bunch of pussies. Frank flicked his cigarette towards Oscar. You forget to score real junk, Oscar? Is that the real issue here? Dickie tugged his mohawk out of nervousness. I don't care what you call us, Frank. We're in deep shit, thanks to you. And I'm not talking the tour in the van. We just wanted to play music, man. We didn't want trouble. We didn't plan on no fucking war. Frank nodded. We didn't start it, but we have to finish it. See? Oscar pointed at Frank with an unlit cigarette. Crazy! You can't reason with him. Frank walked back to the back of the van. He returned with a wooden baseball bat. It had Peacemaker carved in it and was stolen from a bartender in Philadelphia. Get back in the fucking van and shut the hell up. Dickie knew in that moment that Frank was crazy enough to beat them with the bat if they didn't get back in the van. All his sanity had been gone for days, weeks even. Something wild and untamed had taken over Frank. He couldn't shut off the feeling of being on stage. His addiction and drive was as powerful as anything Oscar put in his arm. Nothing would stop him from this tour, from this mission. It consumed him like a burning flame. They had only one choice to survive this. They had to put out the flame. He couldn't believe it had come to this, but he knew. Frank stashed the pistol under the driver's seat. He just hoped he could get there first. So that's the prologue, and from there it switches to 2006. But don't worry, if you haven't read the book, we get plenty of the Fuckers tour. Now, if you are new to Punk Rock Ghost Story, if you haven't read the book, you can hear the Fuckers music. It's up online. If you go to YouTube and search for the Fuckers with an asterisk instead of a U, you could start with Conformity Factory, God Hates Sports, Us Against Them, 15-Year-Old Punk Kid. These are all Fuckers songs that are up online. You can listen to them. Now, if you're a little worried about spoilers, just don't listen to just turn this off now. But I'm going to do a little bit of the behind-the-scenes stuff that I'm going to do with all the readings. And basically, part Punk Rock Ghost Story is a way for me to explore the different eras of punk rock in the 80s and kind of like post 2000, post internet version of punk rock. So a great deal of the story takes place, the majority of the story takes place with a band from 2006 called People's Uprising that are also from Indiana. And they buy the same tour van. And they have access to the tour journal that the fuckers wrote. So, and they basically follow the same tour. So it's it's a punk rock ghost story. It's the title, but I think it's a good introduction, and I hope that I got you interested enough to check out the rest of the book. I'll be reading other chapters and sections sporadically from the book, with more in depth on like what I was doing. So basically, what I was trying to do with that prologue and the very first paragraph, I have written 2 drafts of this novel. I wrote a version of this novel in 2007, which I ended up not using. And so that very first section that talks about like the energy and the vibe in the basement shows, that didn't exist in the first version. That only existed in the 2015 version. So I wrote the first draft in 2007 and the second draft in 2015, and I basically started from scratch in the 2015 version. But the this was the same prologue. It just I just started it from nothing, and partially because I did not like the writing style that I used in 2007. So, and I increased the length of the book by about 20 or 30,000 words from the first draft to the second draft. But again, it was a from scratch draft. I used the same outline, but absolutely none of the text from the 2007 version. So it's the same story, just better told. All right, so hope you enjoyed this. Please, if you don't own a copy of Punk Rock Ghost Story, it means a lot to me. The cover art by Matthew Rivera is amazing. It is a really cool book to have on your shelf. There's lots of bonus material at the back of the book that kind of explains the fake history of the band, and I think that's a fun and valuable thing. And I worked on this book for 9 years, so I would love to see its sales go up a little bit because I think it's a really neat story and I think you'll get a lot out of it. So if you like that intro, please pick up the book. It's on Amazon. There's copies at Mysterious Galaxies in San Diego and Verbatim Books in San Diego. And those copies are signed. So you can order them online from Mysterious Galaxies or Verbatim if you want signed copies. Thanks.